Are you sure a clown can't pop out and make this nightmare complete?
I should have brought my red nose.
Well, I thought you left.
I'm a sucker for a free bag of cookies. So clowns, huh?
How'd you end up down here, Waz? A couple of wrong turns on your way to the greater good.
More than a couple, my friend. More than a couple.
Well, this one's on decisions made behind my back.
And now my brother is breathing through tubes. We won't even know how bad it is until the swelling in his brain subsides. And all because I wasn't strong enough to say no to something you started.
You gave Wallace what he was asking for.
No.
A chance to make a difference.
How much longer here?
Why do you think he never asked you to come visit him in prison? Why do you think he walks to work every morning with his head down? We all need a purpose, Tufo. Without it, we're just blood and bone.
All right, good morning, guys. Nice to start off the morning with a very nice light video clip, right? Well, as Andy said, I'm Jeremy Baumann, and I am super excited to be with you guys today. I'm going to be talking about purpose. And I'll tell you, I'm qualified to do that, or at least I hope I'm qualified to do that. I did a certification a few years ago where I facilitate life plans for guys, which two-day one-on-one experience where it does lots of things, but a big part of that is helping people discover their purpose in life and put a plan together to live that out. But before we talk more about purpose, though, I'll say self-proclaimed king of the dad jokes. Anyone here like dad jokes? Yeah, all right. So one for it, and Ryan, you cannot say what the punchline is, but why doesn't Jesus wear jewelry? Anyone? Because he breaks every chain. Come on. If only Perry were here with his drums. So, anyway, so going back into the video here, so that was the not very popular show, Shades of Blue. I don't know if anyone ever watched that, starring Ray Liotta, who you saw there, and Jennifer Lopez as well. And in that show, so it's kind of like The Sopranos. I'm sure a lot of you watched The Sopranos. So Ray Liotta, his character was Waz, and the guy he was talking to was Tufo. And they're both cops, but they're dirty cops. And so for those of you who are Sopranos fans, Ray Liotta is kind of the Tony Soprano of these dirty cops, right? And then Tufo is one of his guys. And what had happened in there was they made reference to Wallace, and that was Tufo's brother. And he had been in prison, done a lot of bad things in life, and he talked about Waz talked about Wallace walking around with his head down, and then at the end he talks about, hey, we all need a purpose, or without purpose, we're all just blood and bone. And I think that there's something deep there to that, I think, right? Because if we don't have purpose, then we're all just, might think we're all just an accident. Why did God create us? God created us for a purpose. He created us for a reason. And that's the important thing of discovering purpose, is what God wants to do through us. And so we'll see if this works-ish. Okay. All right. So what purpose is not? A lot of guys think that purpose is your job, right? And purpose is definitely not part of your job. But you do have a purpose, and you live that out in your job. Purpose is also not your family. Family is obviously super important, and you want to make that a priority in your life, but your purpose is not your family. Your purpose is not your friends. Your purpose is not how to make yourself happier. But as I talk about living out your purpose later, I'll talk about the joy that can bring. And your purpose is not just something you know, right? So some guys are like, all right, I want to find my purpose, and found it, great, and okay, well, you don't do anything with that, right? So those are just a couple things of what purpose is not. Purpose is, this is according to the Oxford language, the reason for which something is done or created, or the reason for which something exists, or why God created you. I added that. But I also like the Urban Dictionary definition. It's that little flame that lights a fire under your butt. Purpose, and they didn't use the word butt, they used a different word, but we'll keep it G-rated here this morning. But purpose keeps you going like a strong car with a full tank of gas. And so that purpose can really fill you up to do what God created you to do. So one guy here, Tom Brady, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of him, but Pastor Mike has talked about this quote before, but a few years ago, it was actually back in 2016, Tom Brady was interviewed on 60 Minutes, and he said, why do I have three, and I know you guys can read this, but why do I have three Super Bowl rings and still think there's something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey man, this is what it is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life. Me, I think, God, it's got to be more than this. I mean, this can't be what it's all cracked up to be. I mean, I've done it. I'm 27, what else is there for me? And by that time, he had won, I don't know how many Super Bowls, a handful of Super Bowls. He had a supermodel wife. He had a few kids. He's made, well, at that point, dozens or maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't know the number, so I don't know if any of you guys can relate to that, have hundreds of $1 million at home. Anybody won a handful of Super Bowls in the house? Anybody have supermodel wives? You're all supposed to raise your hand when I ask that question, right? That's right. But a lot of us probably can't relate to the life that Tom Brady has led there, but we can relate potentially to being filled up with things that the world says are good to be filled up with, right? Family, money, achievements at work. Work was football for him, obviously. But some of us might relate a little more to, I'll say, Tom number 2. So if you read the book or read the chapter about purpose here, Patrick talks about Tom, his buddy Tom, and what his life was like. He had climbed the corporate ladder. He's a prominent attorney, made a lot of money. He had a lot of possessions, status, right? He was probably a big name in his community. And Patrick talked about how through tears he told me, he said, my life has no meaning, no purpose. So I've been chasing the wind all these years, right? I've been accomplishing all these things, and no need to raise your hand, but how many of you guys can relate to that too, on maybe a more day-to-day degree than Tom Brady, right? I know I have, right? Over the years, it's easy to get caught up in what the world says is worth chasing, whatever that might be. And so Tom talked about that to Patrick there. And he spent a lifetime pursuing the God with a small g that he wanted, which was all the money and possessions and the status and the things. Then woke up one day and didn't have any idea who God was or what he was there for, anything like that. And there was a prayer breakfast that was going on, and Tom knew some guys were going to this, and he received an invitation. He received an invitation at prayer breakfast, which then opened his eyes to who God really was and what God had in store for him, and started him on that journey. And I know that some of you are here because of an invitation, right? And how life-changing is that? I know that I walked in these doors because of a guy who told me, who didn't even go here, right? He's like, yeah, I should check out Hope, They have great music, and that was a long time ago, and still have great music here. But that's what got me in here, right? But it's an invitation that can make the world of difference to any guy that you encounter, or any person that you might encounter. So I just want you to be thinking about this. We'll talk more about this later too. Is that invitation and the eternal gift that can have for somebody. But when Tom went to this prayer breakfast, what interested him the most was the peace that he saw amongst all these men, which they attributed to their personal relationship with Jesus. And I know that a lot of guys in this room today or on Zoom today, have a relationship with Jesus, and some don't. And if you don't, I'd really encourage you to take a look at that and what that really means to have that day-to-day relationship with Jesus Christ, because that's what he wants, right? Because when we have that relationship, that's when we have purpose, and that's when we can live our life for God and for the things that he calls us to do. And the amount of joy that Jesus brings, I know in my life and a lot of guys here, it's second to none, and it lasts forever. It's that joy that lasts longer than the money or the fame or whatever it is, the accomplishments that you have at work or at home or whatever it is. But it's life-changing. So if you're not there, I encourage you to take a look at that and what that looks like, and talk to guys around you that have a relationship with God, their lives have been changed by God, and just get to know what that looks like. But part of that too, when Tom dug into that, leading up to that relationship, he realized that he was just kind of going to church, going through the motions, and I know that I've been there, prior to really, I'll say, digging in. And maybe some of you guys can relate too, in your past or even today, is that you find yourself, you walk into the doors on Sunday morning or Saturday night or this morning, right? And it's like, I'm going to go do my thing and have breakfast with the guys, and but you're going through the motions, but the heart, the relationship isn't there, right? And that's what really can change. So the importance of finding purpose. So Proverbs 19:21 says, you can make many plans, but the Lord's purpose will prevail. And so purpose is all about, it's about God and it's about others, and it's also about you. And a lot of times I think we think about our purpose, right? And I've talked about finding your purpose and that kind of thing. And that's what we need to do in life, is find our purpose. But we have to know that purpose is to serve God. And it's God's purpose, right? God has given us that purpose. That isn't something that we own and belongs to us, but our purpose is used to serve God. And by serving God, or by loving people, by serving other people, by doing things for other people, that's how we serve God. And so that's how we find purpose, and that's what our purpose does, is help the world around us. It's not self-serving. But once you find that purpose, once you discover what that is, you have to set goals, right, in order to live out your purpose and whatever that looks like. And that can be in every part of your life, right? But it's important to set those goals. And I talked earlier about not just knowing your purpose, but actually living it out. And so where those goals can come into play is making it an action, right? A day-to-day action. And so goals is stats on goals, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But 83% of people who set goals, 83% of people do not have goals. And those who have goals are 10 times more successful than those without goals. And those who write down their goals are 3 times more successful to accomplish their goals than those who do not. So I say that just because it's important to, when you do discover your purpose, to set those goals as far as how you're going to live that out and what that looks like on a day-to-day life. But also ask yourself, are those goals moving you towards your purpose, or are they moving you away from it, or are they keeping you where you are? So a lot of times when we talk about purpose, as I mentioned before, it's career. That's one of the first things that comes to mind, because we spend most of our waking hours in our job or doing some kind of work, right? But when you're looking to make a change based on whatever your purpose might be from a vocational perspective, you need to ask yourself, and I'm not going to claim this, but Pastor Richard said once a long time ago, he said, are you running to something or from something? And so the same thing that goes with purpose. Are you running to your purpose, or are you running from it? Are your goals helping you move towards your purpose, or pushing you away from your purpose? And that's something that you want to be looking at and examining in every part of your life. So in the book, Patrick talks about eternal purpose versus earthly purpose. And the eternal purpose is being to enjoy God forever in heaven. And how do we get there, right? And I think John 3:16 sums that up. For God so loved the world, he gave his only Son, so that we may not perish, but we might have eternal life. And that's where that relationship with Jesus comes in. Because there's nothing that we need to do to enjoy God forever in heaven, other than receive the gift that he has given us. There's not, okay, here are these 17 things that you need to do to become a believer, or to accept Jesus into your life, or any of those things. It's just accepting that gift that he has given us. And so once we got the eternal purpose down, which may or may not be easier for you, I don't know, but we have the earthly purpose. And what did God put us on earth to do? And how do we glorify him in the process? Philippians 2:13 says, for it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. And as I mentioned before, it's not your purpose, but God's purpose for you. And we have to keep that at the forefront of our minds, so that, again, it's God's purpose for us, not our purpose. So if you dig into the earthly purpose there's 2 components to that. There's the universal purpose that Patrick talks about, and that's something that we're all called to do. We're all called to, in the Bible, we're all called to love God. We're called to love others. Several things that God tells us to do there that we all have to do. And people will say, oh, my purpose is to love God. And yeah, that is purpose. But there's also a unique purpose for you, and that's your personal purpose, is what Patrick calls it. But those earthly purposes have to be lived out, the earthly purpose has to be lived out in every part of your life. And so as you examine how you live your life, right, there's just you and what you're doing, walking around, wherever it is that you're walking around, and what you're saying, what you're doing, and the image you're portraying. There's also your family, so how you're interacting with your spouse, your kids, your mom, your dad, whoever it is, your in-laws. and how do we live out our purpose in that component of our life with our family? How do we live out our purpose in our vocation? You know, you have your purpose here and then each component underneath it, and is that vocation, does that line up with what that purpose is, right? But it's about bringing that joy into the purpose, into vocation, and how you live it every day. And then also how you do it in your community, whether it's here with the men who are part of your spiritual community, or with your neighbors, or with your friends, or wherever it is that you're hanging out, or the people you're hanging out with. How are you living out your purpose with everybody around you? And so, as I talked about the life plans that I've done before, so the purpose, part of that is we come up with purpose statements, as I mentioned. And so I just want to share a couple with you to see what this purpose looks like, right? Because a lot of times I think people, again, talk about vocation. My purpose is to, sell cars or, run a business or whatever it is. But the first one there, that's actually my purpose. When I had my lifeline done a few years ago, I discovered that I exist to help others live out the joyful life that God created them to live. And so as I look at that purpose that God has given me, and then how do I live it out with my family? Am I being a means to provide that joy that God is offering, right? And how am I working, how's God working through me to enable my family, to help my family? How am I doing that at work? How am I doing that in my full-time gig? I'm in sales, right? How am I able to help people live out the joyful life God had created them to live? And you think, well, you're in sales, how do you do that? And that's bringing joy to the people that I work with, to clients, to whoever I encounter. Then also, how do I do that in my community? How do I do that amongst men here, or amongst people at Hope, or with my neighbors, or wherever that is? But that's the important part, again, is finding out how are you going to do that through each domain, through each part of your life. Another life statement or purpose statement here is inspire meaningful connections leading to innovative transformation for the growth of his kingdom. That doesn't sound self-serving at all, right? That's something that God has gifted this person with, that God has told this person, hey, this is what I'm calling you to do. This is what your purpose is. This is who you are in me, and this is what I want you to do. The last one being, I exist to inspire freedom through love, curiosity, and joy. And this person, they run a business on their own, and that's what they want to do with everybody they encounter, is inspire that freedom. And that's what this person does with their friends, because I know this guy very well. He does this with his friends. He does this with his community, with his clients. But these are just a couple examples of some purpose statements that I've seen. And again, you notice that these are not self-serving. These are all about helping people, inspiring people. This is about what God wants to do through each and every one of these guys. So I want to talk about Paul a little bit, as Patrick did in his book. For those of you who don't know Paul, he wrote a lot of the New Testament. He was Saul before he had an encounter with God, and then his name was changed to Paul. And so as you read about Paul, and he did some terrible things. While there's no evidence that he actually killed anybody himself. I don't know why I'm saying that with a smile, because it's not very funny, but. But he was there and condoned it. He set up these murders. He tortured people. He persecuted other Christians. He pulled people out of their houses, had them arrested. He was not a good dude, right? He was responsible for the deaths of lots of people there. But Saul at the time had that encounter with God, who blinded him and sent him on his way to Damascus. And while Paul was on his way, God said to Ananias, who was a guy who was there in Damascus, he said, "Go, for Saul is my chosen instrument to take my message to the Gentiles and to kings, as well as to the people of Israel." And Ananias was like, "What the heck, God, this guy is terrible, right? I mean, picture some bad dude orchestrating deaths of people here in Des Moines, and God telling you, hey, this guy's going to come and walk alongside and help this guy." Like, what the heck, right? So that's probably what Ananias is thinking is, what are you doing here, God? This is crazy. But eventually, Paul, I'll say, had his full conversion, for lack of a better term, became a believer, and as I said, wrote a lot of the New Testament, and is arguably the greatest evangelist the world has ever seen and likely ever will see. And Paul traveled all over. He was beaten. He was imprisoned several times. He had a lot of bad things that came his way. But why didn't he give up? With all the beatings that he took, being put in prison, all these bad things that happened to him, why didn't he give up? And while I wasn't there with Paul and to ask him, but I suspect that his answer would be, if we were to ask him, is because God gave him this purpose. God told him, hey, this is what you're going to do. You're going to glorify me through all of these things that you're doing, which is pointing people to Christ, right? Think of how many people God used Paul to point to him and whose lives were changed for eternity. But what if you're the next Paul? And I don't mean the next Paul, as in hopefully no one's going to be thrown into prison several times here or beaten up, and that's probably happened to some of you, right? But what if you are going to make that kind of difference that Paul did? Some of you, I know there are guys here who I know have invited lots of guys here, right? And are pointing other people to Christ in every part of their life. But what does God want to do through you? What does he want to keep doing through you? What does he want to do through you that he is not doing through you today because you've not accepted that gift? But what if you're the next Paul? What if you're the guy to make waves in the world and change people's lives forever? But God can do that through you, and some of you may be called to that. But lots of times those bad things that can happen, like happened to Paul, good things come out of it. And so I'm a big believer in Romans 8:28 that says, we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called into his purpose for them. And notice that I capitalized everything, right? Because it's not just the good things that God can use to do through us, but it's also the bad things. Bad things have happened to all of us, right? And I know that through my own observations and looking at those bad things that have happened to me, I know that God has used every single one of those for good. And sometimes we have to struggle to look at that, if we're honest, right? Sometimes we're probably thinking, yeah, that wasn't worth it, And honestly, some things in my life, at times I don't feel are worth it, but God has still glorified, God has still used for good. One of those things was a friend of mine, Craig. I grew up with a friend, Craig, through, since 5 years old up until college, and we both went to Iowa State together. And our freshman year, a couple weeks after school started, he disappeared. And it was several days before he was found, and unfortunately he was found dead, and he had committed suicide. And on that same day, my grandma died. I mean, it was a terrible day. And I look at that. Craig was growing up was known as the class clown. Everybody loved him, and a lot of times these things you don't see it coming, right? And it took me a number of years to realize what God wanted to do there through me was that I want to prevent another Craig from happening, right? And I'm sure that a lot of you know people who have taken their own lives as well. And so as that terrible thing has happened, God has used that to help me to reach out to guys around me, to might be friends, to coworkers, to family, to whoever that might be. And going back to my purpose statement of help others live out the joyful life God created them to live, that's part of what I want to do. That's part of what God wants to do through me, is making sure that guys are okay. And sometimes, it's just a regular check-in with guys. How you doing? Sometimes there have been strangers I see something, I'm like, something seems off. And as Richard says, sometimes it might be the pizza, and sometimes it is. But you'll never go wrong by reaching out to a guy or your spouse or whoever it is by just checking in, saying, how you doing? And I always, my friends can attest to this, I'll say, how you doing? And how are you really doing? And get that honest answer. Because I think that as guys, particularly as guys, we don't have that opportunity a lot of time. Or we're afraid to open up to really how we feel. And it's important to ask that question. Some guys have to be drawn into it, right? Sometimes some guys will just tell you everything, just walk by, hi, Bob, how's it going? Well, let me tell you everything that's going on in my life, right? But I think a lot of us guys, those things need to be drawn out of us. And so I encourage you to do that, to love all of the guys around you. But sometimes those bad situations, they can just go on and on and on, right? Like we're in one right now. We're in this pandemic and have been for over a year and a half. And it sucks. Does anyone here love it? I mean, I don't think so, right? But there are good things that comes from that pandemic. My son, he's 12, and probably a year ago or so, my wife asked him, she said, Colby, she's like, how are you doing with COVID? And he's like, well, it sucks, but whenever I think about COVID, I just think about all the good things that have come of it. And I'm like, I wish I'd come up with that, right? I mean, he's 12. And so maybe that's a good posture for us to take during this time, or whatever bad thing might be going on in your life now or coming down the road, is taking that posture of looking for the good that come out of it. But this whole time during COVID or other parts of your life can feel like you're just sitting in a dump, right? You're just sitting amongst garbage, and that pandemic is that garbage that's all around you. And we're just looking for that glimmer of hope in that dump, that glimmer of hope in that pandemic, or wherever that might be in your life. Sometimes it's tough to find. Sometimes we have to look real hard. Kind of like Michael and Dwight from The Office might have to look for that hope. I have to find an Office clip for it anytime I do any kind of talk, I know, because it's the greatest show in the world. But I mean, hope grows in a dump. How brilliant is that, right? I mean, we're in this dump that is the pandemic, But let's look for that hope, and let's find out where we can grow that hope, and more importantly, where God can grow that hope through us in that dump. And a big part of that, obviously, is discovering your unique purpose in life. And it's your unique purpose in life, as I talked about. It's no person I've ever met has the exact same purpose, right? So let's talk through how to discover that a little bit. So I'd say one is ask God, what do you want to do through me? What is the purpose that you would have for me? How can I go out and serve the world around me? But don't just talk to God. Listen, right? Because you're not going to try just talking to your wife, talk, and then, walking away and not listening. That's probably not going to go very well, right? Probably not many good things can happen to that. But you got to take time to listen and ask God, what do you want to do? And sit in that. The other thing, I talked about Craig and what had happened there, and that was a turning point in my life. And I'd say examine your own turning points. And those turning points, again, going back to Romans 8:28, the positives and the negatives, right? All the good stuff, your spouse or your child being born, or the new job you got, whatever it is that turned you, or the bad things. You had a family member pass away. Maybe you got in a car accident. The gentleman here, I'm not sure where he is, that talked about his baptism. I mean, look at that. Look at the bad thing that happened. There he is. The bad thing that happened and the good that came out of that. That's incredible. But examine those turning points that are in your life. Write those down, and also what you learned from them. Also dig into your core talents. Everybody's got at least a couple there. And so dig into what those talents might be. One of them that I found during my life plan as a bucket filler, right? And that kind of goes into the helping others live out the joyful life God created for them. So God has given me the gift of encouragement, and I try to encourage everybody that I encounter, right, in some way, shape, or form. I'm not always good at it, but that's one of the things that God has done through me. And so helping discover what those core talents might be can help you discover that purpose. Also look at what's on your heart. And when I say that, answer these three questions: is what do you care about, what do you dream about, and what is your opus gloria in life? What is your main contribution in life? What do you want people to say about you at your funeral? We've probably all thought about that question before, but really dig into that. And if your purpose is X, are people going to say, hey, Bob lived out his purpose doing this, doing that, right? But examine those questions. What do you really care about? I care about my dog. Well, I don't really. My dog's kind of annoying, but I do care about her. But what do I really care about? What's in your heart there? What does God put on your heart? And what do you dream about? Again, those are God's dreams. What is God putting through you to dream about? And what is your opus gloria? Again, what is your main contribution in life? Everybody read this with me? I always want to say it, right? Like Pastor Mike does. I mean, come on, terrible joke. Anyway, so this is the Greek word skopos, which the translation for skopos in the English is scope, also purpose. And so where we find that purpose is, think of that's a gun scope, right? Where we find that purpose is the intersection of those core talents and what our heart talks about, what we care about. We talked about the opus gloria here in the last slide, but it's the intersection there, right? And it's finding out where those things meet and how that works into your purpose and what God wants to do through your life. And that's, again, really the most important part is finding out what that purpose is. In Jeremiah 29:11, my company in its 29:11 group came after Jeremiah 29:11 says, I know the plans I made for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. And all I realized, the contextual part of this was the prophet Jeremiah speaking to the Israelites back in the day who were going through some tough times, right? But I think that this is still applicable to everybody today, because God didn't create you to just, walk around with your head down. Like Waz talked about in the video at the beginning about Wallace, who walked around with his head down. He didn't know his purpose, right? God didn't create you to just do nothing. God created you for a reason, right? He has plans for you. He wants you to prosper. He wants you to do good in life. He wants to work through you. He wants to work with you. He wants to do amazing things through you. And I can tell you firsthand that understanding your purpose, guys, I mean, when you get that and then you start living that out in every part of your life, there is nothing like that. I mean, that purpose is for others, right? But the joy that it brings you, knowing when you're in that zone, right? I mean, you're locked into what God is calling you to do. That's awesome. And when you fall outside of that, I'm not doing exactly what God created me to do. And it might not be bad things you're doing, but it might not be what God has called you to do, guys. And so I encourage you to find that purpose in your life, because when you do, the joy that brings to yourself and to others around you is second to none. So, that said, questions for today that I want you guys to talk about at your table there is, how do you relate to Tom now or in the past? And that could be Tom Brady, if there's any Super Bowl champions in the room. But how do you relate to Tom now or in the past? We talked about he was working, he wanted money, he wanted possessions, he wanted, we'll say, fame before he found God, right? And just decided that he needed to live for the right thing. So how do you relate to him? We talked about that invitation as well that Tom had, right? Those guys in his prayer breakfast invited him to. So are you inviting people into the presence of God to show them what Tom's friends showed him? Who are you bringing to Men of Hope? Who are you bringing to church on Sunday morning? Who are you inviting into your home to share God's love with? And while that can be super awkward, hey, let's share God's love, right? Don't want to do it maybe that way. That might be a little off-putting for some. But how are you loving people? How are you showing people the way? But I want you guys to write down 3 names, and you can talk about them in your group if you want. But write down 3 people that maybe you should be inviting into the presence of God, and whatever that looks like for you. How have we talked about the turning points in Romans 8:28, and how have those good or bad events shaped your life, like Paul talks about in Romans 8:28? And so think about that and share some of those things in your group there, of some of the good things or some of the bad things in your life, and how those things have shaped your life. And lastly, ask the guys around you, do you know what your purpose is? And if so, what is it? How are you living it out? So, all right. I believe this is time you guys get in your groups and talk through the questions and enjoy. Thank you.